Dame Jocelyn Burnell is a scientific badass and role model, and for a long time she was overlooked by a misogynistic, patriarchal scientific establishment. When she went to the University of Glasgow, she was the only woman in honors physics, and there was a tradition there at the time that anytime a woman entered the lecture hall, all the men would stamp their feet, whistle, hurl catcalls, and bang their desks. How fucked up is that? But she made it through and got accepted to a PhD program at Cambridge. She started her career there as an astrophysics undergrad, helping to build a radio telescope with her advisor, Tony Hewish. The telescope is about the size of 57 tennis courts, and she was largely in charge of the 120 miles of wire and cables. It took 2 years to complete, and when it was completed in 1967, she got to reading data looking for quasars, which had been discovered just the previous decade. She had the sole responsibility for operating the telescope and analyzing the data, which came recorded on a 3-track pen recorder on chart paper. It printed about 100 feet of chart paper a day. In 6 months, it had printed 3 miles worth of paper that she analyzed by hand. And she would log where she saw quasars and magnetic interference. But every now and then, she saw something that she described as a bit of scruff, which was a 1/4 inch of enigmatic data hidden in miles of paper. After a few times, she brought it to the attention of Tony, who dismissed it as radio interference. But she wasn't convinced, so she ran the paper through the machine faster so that the data would take up more visible space. After about a month, she found it again, and this time was able to tell that the radio signal was a string of pulses coming in every 1.3373 seconds. Tony was like, that settles it, it must be man-made. But again, Jocelyn wasn't so sure about that and continued to run test after test. It wasn't the fault of the equipment, and it couldn't be man-made because it was coming from about 200 light years away, and nobody had seen anything like it before. They couldn't make sense of it, but in hindsight, we know they were looking at the rapidly spinning collapsed core of a star-gone supernova called a neutron star or a pulsar. Neutron stars are so dense that it's like if every human on Earth were packed to the size of a thimble. Then she went on to find 2 more pulsars, proving it wasn't a fluke and that she had found a new class of astronomical objects. And a paper gets published with her name second after Tony's, and then the media gets interested. Tony takes to the spotlight and answers the real questions. Jocelyn gets asked how tall she is, what her measurements are, and photographers ask her to undo some buttons. And Tony doesn't do shit about it, and fuck him for that. Then little Anthony, I'm not a big fan of his, and the head of the department accept a Nobel Prize for the discovery of pulsars in '72. Some people call it the Nobel Prize because she really shouldn't have been snubbed on her own discovery like that. And for his part, Tony told a New York Times documentarian, when you plan a ship of discovery and somebody up the masthead says, "Land ho!" that's great, but who actually inspired it and conceived it? There's a difference between skipper and crew. Personally, and I'll probably end up getting in fights in the comments about this, I don't care if giving credit to the person in charge is regular science shenanigans. It's bullshit. People deserve credit for their work. Pasteur did this to his underlings, and fuck him for that, and fuck Thomas Edison too. Ultimately, through grit and strength of will, Jocelyn endured. But she doesn't want this generation of women and minorities in STEM to have to. So she decided to use a £2.3 million physics prize she won in 2018 to help establish the Burnell Graduate Scholarship Fund. And its purpose is to help women, minority, and refugee students become physics researchers.